Hey everyone, this video is a little bit different from what I usually post in that I'm just sort of talking off the cuff here with a few notes that I have. And I'm not sure if this is really a wonderful idea, but I'm going to just get some things off my chest and talk about the election that just happened. Because I've been having thoughts and ideas and feelings going around in my head for the last 24 hours since it happened. And a lot of my friends and loved ones have been rather shocked and awed at what occurred, as was I. And I just feel that rather than, because of the magnitude of what's happened, that it deserves to be commented on. But I'm not going to rant and rave, and I don't want anybody who, you know, every time I've brought up politics in the past, I've sort of regretted it because there's, you know, such divisiveness and so many opinions and counter opinions, and it gets pretty ugly sometimes. And this is not intended to be a rant against anyone or anything, but in fact just some ideas that have been occurring to me that I thought might be helpful and useful to everyone. I don't care what side of the political fence you are on, or if you voted for Trump or you didn't vote for Trump. That's not the point of this video. It's to try to treat this experience for myself as a learning experience, and to try to maybe share some thoughts and things that I feel that I've learned along the way that maybe might help some of you guys too. So here we go. The first thing I want to comment on is the perception of reality versus actual reality, of what's actually going on in the world. It's a very important part of critical thinking and of knowing and being aware of what's happening in the world, to realize that all of us are limited by our understanding of what goes on in the world, by our perceptions of what happens. I've made a video in the past about perception being reality. In other words, how we view things, how we think about things is tempered and shaped and formed by how we are able to perceive the world. If we were all blind, we would not be seeing things. We'd be hearing things, tasting things, touching things, but we wouldn't be seeing the light waves that things give off, and we wouldn't be interpreting that as sight. And yet, that would all still exist. Mentally as well, we have all kinds of cognitive traps and holes that we fall into, pitfalls that we fall into with our perception, right? Because of cognitive biases, because of cognitive dissonance, because, you know, counter-opposed ideas that we run into, and how do we resolve those counter oppositions. We have biases, we have things that we want to be a certain way, and so we skew our perception to make it look to ourselves as though it's that way, when in fact it's not actually that way. And of course I'm talking about this because I think that on one side of the political equation in this election, a very great number of people let their biases run away with them. I know I certainly did. And that skewed our perception of what was going on. And this is you know, critical thinking 101 on this, is that we have to work so much harder to overcome our own biases. And of course, these exist on both sides of the political fence, as does everything I'm saying here, so I won't keep saying that. But this message does go out to the victors of this election as well as the losers, okay? Because we all have to guard against our biases. They are powerful forces mentally in how we view things. And they can really, really give us some wrong interpretations of information that's right there in front of us. And it can even, they're so powerful, our cognitive biases are so powerful, that they can actually even, in a way, prevent us from seeing what's right in front of our eyes. And in this case, in this particular case, with this election, my own biases in regards to the Democratic Party heavily got in the way of me seeing the opposition party and the validity of some of the arguments that were being made and the overwhelming outrage that was being expressed by the voters who voted Trump into office. I was misperceiving the degree of that outrage. I had sort of, had it all in my head that this was a minority of the population, certainly not a majority. Well, it ended up being about a 50-50 split. And so I was way off. And I'm, not really comforted in the fact that I was not alone in that, but I certainly was not. The Democratic Party itself, well, let me back up a little bit. When I was a Scientologist, and especially when I was a Sea Org member, I was very conservative in my politics and my outlook on the world, both fiscally and socially. Scientology politics tend to skew very conservative because it follows the advice of L. Ron Hubbard, who himself was a pretty conservative guy when it came to political leanings, and he was also very, very prone to conspiracy theory. And so I followed in his footsteps in that. And I was very much into conspiracy theory and this idea of one-worlders and the 12 bankers who are running the world and that sort of thing. And so these were biases that I had that's, again, skewed how I looked at the world. When I stopped, politics wasn't a huge deal in Scientology. It was just sort of one of these things that we would, kind of how we looked at things. And when I got out of Scientology, though, it became a bigger deal to me because voting was more important. What was going on in the world, in the real world, outside of the Scientology bubble became more important to me for obvious reasons, I think. And I started paying more attention to what was going on. And as I did that, the more and more that I did that, and the more friends I made and the more I got out and met people and that sort of thing, a lot of my Scientology biases started to fall off. For example, Scientologists are, whether they'll admit it or not, or whether they'll tell you about it or not, are extremely anti-LGBT. It's written in the materials of Scientology that you have to be that way, and that's just how they are. Well, when I started questioning my Scientology beliefs, that was one of the beliefs I had to start, taking a good hard look at. And that led me to a more liberal-minded approach to tolerance and understanding with others. And I'm not saying that the left has a monopoly on tolerance and understanding by any stretch. I'm saying that my interpretation of my conservative values made me very intolerant. And as I learned more about how, people deserve respect and dignity and understanding in this big world of ours that we all share, I skewed more toward the left as a result of that. And I started looking into and taking on the ideas of the left, right, the liberals, and I started looking at the Democratic Party rather than the Republican Party as more where I should be looking for answers and looking to see who I should be following politically. That was not necessarily a smart thing for me to do, but it was what I did. The reason I say it wasn't very smart is because by the time I got involved in all of this, after 2012 or so, the Democratic Party itself was not really, in reality, what it had presented itself to be, or some of its values and whatnot. The Democrats classically or historically have been viewed as and presented as the populist party, the workers' party, the party that will fight for individual rights and that sort of thing, right? For the common guy, for the working guy. Well, that's something in history. That's not necessarily something in the present. And the Democratic Party at some point, I don't know when, decided to be more aligned with their rich, elitist donors, and they started moving in a direction of pro-Wall Street and pro-money and this sort of thing. And this was demonstrated, of course, pretty aptly by Hillary. And you're perfectly free to cast as many aspersions at me for my, ill short-sightedness in not seeing that, or, finally waking up and coming to the party now, but I'm saying that this is where I was coming from. So I had this skewed view of the Democratic Party in the left wing. I saw along the way that there was extremist, as I learned more about destructive cults and extremist views and intolerance and that sort of thing after coming out of Scientology, I started seeing indicators of that in extreme left-wing actions, just like I saw examples of it in extreme right-wing activities with the religious right and that sort of thing. So I saw it on both sides, but I was still kind of skewing over to the left. So I didn't see that the Democrats had lost touch with the people, right? I thought that, and I'd bought into the idea that the Democrats were in tune with the regular Joe and that sort of thing. And so when you set up a bias like that, then you become blind to certain realities that are more obvious to people who don't have those biases, like people on the right-wing side who look at that and go, hell no, what are you talking about? And so now as far as this election cycle goes, there were also a lot of misperceptions. And really the first indicator, or the first thing I should have seen or would like to talk about here, is Bernie, because Bernie came out and he was immensely popular. I was actually very pro-Bernie, despite the socialist label. I don't really have a problem with that if I see that it's doing something that I thought was constructive, and I thought that his platform was constructive. So what I missed though was, while he had a movement going, a real live movement, and I sort of missed the level of outrage that was behind that movement against the establishment or against the system, so to speak. And that, of course, exists on the right as well, and that's how Trump got voted in. But it was first becoming very, very apparent with the Bernie movement, and of course the first inklings of real trouble with the Democratic Party came to light when it became clear that collusion had been occurring at the highest levels of the DNC with the Clinton campaign, and that everything was not as rosy and above the boards as it all appeared. We talked about this on my Sensibly Speaking podcast. We were upset about it. We didn't think it was cool that there had been, Deborah Wasserman Schultz and Hillary Clinton had been seeming to work together to, ensure that she was going to get the nomination despite this huge popular movement with Bernie. But I was still able to kind of write off some of that because I still had bought into the idea that this was better than, the opposing side, right? And this is also another factor that I want to bring up right now, is this black and white, us versus them kind of thinking. Now, I've talked about this at length, probably ad nauseum, with destructive cults and how they inculcate these ideas. But it's also, when I say that this happens with political parties and stuff too, I really should have looked in the mirror a little bit more, because it was right there affecting my own thinking, that I had already set up this us versus them thing. Not as extreme as I've seen many other people go, so I thought I was doing all right and being pretty objective about the whole thing. But there was still a skew going on there. Had I been more objective, I would have earlier seen rightnesses and wrongnesses on both ends and made a more objective analysis of the situation, and seen what I see, I think a bit more clearly now, which is that there are real issues, real problems that need to be solved regardless of political party and regardless of where you're at on the political spectrum. And those labels don't serve us well at all, like really at all. They only serve to limit and compartment our thinking and keep us at odds rather than working together. And I think that's really the bottom line point that I wanted to come to with this, right? If you identify too much or too closely with one side or another, you easily can fall into, and again I say you, I mean me, I mean all of us, can fall into an echo chamber where all you want to hear is reinforcement of your beliefs, reinforcement of your ideas, or what you think is right, and you then fail to challenge yourself and challenge your own ideas, and you fail to listen effectively to what opposing ideas or other ideas might be out there that are perfectly valid, fact-based, reasonable, actual situations or actual views that should be accounted for and should be brought into your thinking. But, you know, hey, it's so easy to push them aside because, oh, that's a Republican, or, oh, that's a red and I'm a blue, or whatever, right? We are so easy to write those things off. And we're challenged in this because it's very inherent to our thinking to do so. Another thing that challenges us enormously with this is the nature and quality of our news media. We rely heavily on a news media who is far more interested in advertising dollars and ratings than they are in actually demonstrating or giving you deep analysis and actual facts and figures and information. So much of what we see and are presented with is skewed one way or another because of editorial decisions or because of ratings decisions or corporate level decisions. You know, it's when a newspaper, for example, is owned by, I can't remember which one, but there was when a newspaper is owned by GE, let's say, and GE is a heavy military contractor, then there might be a chance that that newspaper isn't going to run a story critical of the government giving out military contracts on a particular topic or subject, because that might interfere with GE's getting that military contract, right? These kind of things go on behind the scenes. You don't even know about it. The news certainly isn't telling you about it. It takes deeper investigation and looking to even discover these kind of connections. And this happens all the time, far too often for us to be able to keep up with all of it. But with the internet and the current information age that we live in is a two-edged sword. We have this tremendous amount of volumes and volumes of data, big data, small data, all kinds of information available to us. And that's good, but it's so overwhelming and there's so much of it that it can be bad, because how do you decide, how do you sift through all this and find the truth? How do you find objective analysis and that sort of thing? Well, that's the challenge. And if you rely, and I guess my point here is that if you rely too heavily on the media, I'm not saying you have to ignore them altogether, but if you rely too much on that as a single source of information, I think if you rely on anything as a single source of information, and that's where you get your facts and there's no other place that can get facts, then you're making critical thinking errors there. You have multiple sources are good, but also analysis of the information is important. You don't want to fall into a trap of ad hominem where, oh, that piece of information came from Glenn Beck and therefore it can't be true, because that's not always the case. But if you know that a source has given you bad information more times than not, then you have to, sort of factor that into the equation of how am I going to figure out what's going on, right? And this is all part and parcel of being a critical thinker, is looking at all sides, grading this information, and looking deeper and deeper into the data and drilling down into the details. Unfortunately, this takes time, and it's time a lot of us don't have. And so we end up relying on somebody else to give us that information, but that can lead to the logical fallacy of appeal to authority. We rely on the news media too much as an authority, and we end up making really, really bad decisions based on bad information, misinformation, skewed information, or just outright lies. So this is the challenge we face in the information age. We didn't used to have, there are reasons for this, and I think media back when it was not profit-based, and I'm talking about years ago now, had a more vested interest in being objective and being more fact-based, but that is history, that is not now. And so this is just one of the challenges that we face. In terms of social media, I've certainly ranted about that before, and I'm not ranting now. I'm only cautioning that also trying to get, or keep up with the news or what's happening in the world by social media is also, it's a bigger mistake than relying solely on CNN or Fox News, because social media is always after the fact. Social media is blogs from individuals. It is fake news. It is bot-based news. There are so many fallacies in social media that to give almost anything you read credence in social media. I mean, you know, the number of things that have been posted to Facebook and Twitter that are proven within minutes to be absolutely false make that a very, very questionable, reliable source of information for anyone. And so that is also something that you really need to think with when looking at what's actually going on in the world. So the bottom line with all of this is not let's all distrust the media and let's not, you know, look or listen ever to anything that's ever on TV or the radio or the internet. The bottom line is that we have to think, and also that none of us have a monopoly on the truth. Duh. But it's, you know, it's a point because we can, you know, I definitely fell into that truth trap of feeling like I absolutely had a monopoly or a majority of, you know, the ideas that I was clinging to were absolutely the truth, and how else could it be? And knowing everything that I know and everything that I've learned, you know, to fall into that, it's really inexcusable, and it is absolutely my bad that I did that, right? And so that is why I was caught so off guard by this election. I really shouldn't have been, and I don't think any of us should have been. And I think if we use some of these pieces of advice, but also listen more closely and carefully to each other and work more closely together, even if we have opposing ideas, this is probably the most important part of learning and keeping up with what's going on, is really keeping up with each other rather than these you know, these distant sources of information that, you know, are not necessarily true at all. In terms of moving forward, there is certainly, because of the fact that the election is, you know, split down the middle in terms of the popular vote. I mean, I think the difference was something like 200,000 votes, which is a minuscule number of people in a country of 310 or 20 million people. We are truly a country divided, and if we do not approach the coming years from the point of view of healing the divisions and moving together, we're going to have much more trouble than we've already had. And it's totally up to us to do that. It's not up to somebody else to do that. You know, this election was all set up on the side of, you know, the Republicans were claiming for days and days, weeks, it's rigged, it's rigged, it's rigged. Well, nobody's saying that now. The election was clearly not rigged at all. And that whole thing just sort of dissipates and goes to the wind as though it was never said. Well, it was said. There is this distrust of the establishment that is not as earned as it necessarily should be in regards to, you know, some of these overt conspiracy theories. Yet at the same time, there are, you know, major issues that people are very, very correctly outraged over. That those are the issues, those are the things that we need to be working together on to resolve. And in that working together on this, we need to be mindful that our system was designed by people who were basically geniuses when it came to organizing and putting together the framework of our country, and that framework still exists. And we need to work within the framework of our country to make positive change as we move forward, not try to tear the system down or talk about how ineffective and horrible and awful it is, because it's not. It's a good system. It's one of the best systems that's ever been evolved on this planet. And I think that we can use and use the system and use the things within it to work together to make positive change. When it comes to Donald Trump, I have what I believe to be very valid concerns about him as an individual, and I just want to voice a couple of those right now on my, you know, Scientology themed channel. This is an area that I know more than a little bit about. I have lived under totalitarian, authoritarian rule. I have been in prison-like conditions because of that authoritarian rule. I know what it looks like, I know what it sounds like, and I'm not trying to say, you have to listen to me because I'm an authority and you're not. I'm merely trying to say that that's been a history that I've had. And so when I look at Donald Trump and I listen to Donald Trump, I see echoes of L. Ron Hubbard in so many things that he says and does. As an individual, I'm not talking about the entire Republican Party. I'm not talking about his supporters. I'm not saying there's a cult of Trump. I'm talking about the individual that we have just elected to the highest office in the world. And I'm saying that there is cause for concern with this individual in terms of his trustworthiness and his ability to do what he says he's going to do. And I think these are valid concerns. Now, a lot of people that I've talked to, and I have talked to quite a few Trump supporters at this point, and talked to them about why and wherefore, and I've listened and looked at a lot of things in regards to why they said they were doing what they were doing, and the common denominator seems to be outrage and upset, and they don't care what he said, they just want to see action, they just want to see it move forward, they just want to see change, they don't want to see more of what's been, you know, how things have been, they want to see better things, right? They want to see America great again, this sort of thing. And that's all fine. That's all good, right? But I think it is important that he be held accountable to what he says and to the things he has done, because Donald Trump is not the shining image of perfection in his life. And his attitudes and his ideas about things cannot help but shape his administration and what we're looking at over the next 4 years. And we have to be mindful of that. And I think that there are narcissistic characteristics there, and I think that there are some dangerous characteristics there, and we must be mindful of those and watchful of those. We always should have been mindful and watchful with everybody in our government, because, you know, believe me, I'm not saying here that Hillary is some white dove at all. I don't trust her particularly either, and I understand the upsets and concerns about her. But from my own experience in education and understanding, I don't see the same things in her that I see in Donald Trump in terms of some of those destructive personality characteristics, and so I felt I really should comment on that. Again, in terms of moving forward, just a couple little things I'd like to say to wrap up this little rant of mine. There are some leaders in history that I look up to and really cherish their advice and their direction. And one of them was Mahatma Gandhi. You know, say what you will about the guy, he single-handedly changed the lives of millions and millions and millions of people for the better. And he had some pretty good advice about how to go about doing that. And of course, one of his most famous quotes is, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And, you know, it's not all sunshine and rainbows and that sort of thing, but also the world's not going to end come January. We're going to have to move forward. And so if we, who were not on the side of people who voted for Trump, want to see change in the world, we need to be that change. We need to put our best foot forward, and we need to decide that the way to go about producing that change is to work with our fellows to make that change happen within our system and structure, because it is still possible to do that. Our participation in this system is not an option. Also, we can't really give in to fear or hate. This is so important right now more than ever, because the divisiveness that has been occurring over the last year has been hateful. It has been really nasty. And I haven't liked being part of it. I haven't liked contributing to it, which unfortunately I have too. And I want to heal those wounds. I really do. And here I look to also some quotes from another of my favorite people in the whole world, in this case Martin Luther King Jr., who said a couple things that I will just quote here. One, he said, "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few." And he also said, history is the long and tragic story of the fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. So, we can temper what I'm about to say with those two things, because Martin Luther King was about being effective and he was about moving things forward in a forceful fashion. And it's not, again, all butterflies and rainbows. You have to take a stand, you have to move things forward, and you have to do so forcefully. But he also said, darkness can't drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that. He also said, let no man pull you low enough to hate him. So, I think if we can remove some of that from the equation and take the high road, then we can move the ball down the road for all of us to experience positive change, regardless, again, of our political persuasions or our philosophic standpoints on, how we think things should be. Okay, compromise is possible, and we have a system that allows for that and actually pushes, makes that happen within our existing system. So maybe this is overly optimistic, maybe I'm just being silly in some of your eyes, but I wanted to throw some of this out here now and sort of encourage that we, move forward the way that I've been talking about here. I hope this was helpful. If not, fine, but at least I got it off my chest. Thanks very much for watching. See you guys later.